Blood Bowl is a fantasy football game created by Jervis Johnson for the British games company Games Workshop as a parody of American football. The game was first released in 1987 and has been re-released in new editions since. Blood Bowl is set in an alternate version of the Warhammer fantasy setting, populated by traditional fantasy elements such as human warriors, goblins, dwarves, elves, orcs and trolls. The most recent purchasable edition of the game contains a printed copy of Living Rulebook 1.0. However, the most up-to-date version of the game's rules is the Competition Rules Pack, or CRP. This is no longer available from Games Workshop's website, but can be found on thenf.net, which is the global fan organization for Blood Bowl. Gameplay. Blood Bowl is a two-player, turn-based board game that typically uses 28mm miniatures to represent a contest between two teams on a playing field. A board containing a grid overlay represents the field. Using dice, cards, and counters, the players attempt to score higher than each other by entering the opponent's end zone with a player who possesses the ball. The blood in Blood Bowl is represented by the violent actions available to players. Gameplay is based on a hybrid of American football and rugby. Players may attempt to injure or maim the opposition in order to make scoring easier by reducing the number of enemy players on the field. The player races are drawn from the ranks of fantasy races and have characteristics that reflect the abilities of those races. Elves tend to be agile and good at scoring, while dwarfs and orcs are more suited to a grinding, physical style of play. All teams offer a choice between player types with different statistics. Related races, guests of allied races, exotic or monstrous units, and specialists of different roles. Teams can include any number of players of the most basic type, while the stronger units are limited to 1, 2, 4 or 6 per team. In league play, players gain additional skills and abilities based on their accumulation of experience points. Players face potential injury or even death on the field throughout their careers. Teams improve by the purchase of off-field staff such as cheerleaders, assistant coaches, and apothecaries. Disparity between team values is offset by the purchase of ad hoc star players or mercenaries, as well as bribes and additional temporary support staff, such as wizards or a halfling cook. Rules. Teams consist of 11 to 16 players, of which 11 are allowed on the pitch at any one time. Each player is represented by an appropriate miniature and has statistics and skills that dictate his or her effect on play. There are 4 player statistics. MA indicates how fast the player is. Saint indicates the player's basic fighting ability. AG indicates how well the player handles the ball and evades opposing players. AV indicates how difficult it is to injure the player. In addition, players may have special skills that affect any number of circumstances in play. Some of the more commonly used skills are block, dodge, sure hands, pass, and catch. These skills are not necessary to perform their corresponding actions, but will give the player an advantage. In his or her turn, a coach may have each player take one of the following actions. Move the player through empty squares. Block, fight an adjacent opposing player who is standing. In addition, the following 4 actions may be taken by one player per team turn. Blitz, move and then block an adjacent opposing player who is standing. Foul, move and then foul an adjacent opposing player who is prone. Pass, move and then throw the ball. Hand off, move and then give the ball to an adjacent player. Some skills also allow for special player actions. If a player action fails, the team turn ends immediately. This defining game mechanic is called the turnover rule. The turnover rule makes every action tense for the coaches, and together with the 4-minute rule it can make the game very fast-paced. Some rules such as the 11-player limit may be broken as long as the opposing coach does not notice. Other rules are strictly off-limits. However, this idea is often only used with the agreement of both players. Teams. Each team represents one race typically equivalent to the armies in Warhammer Fantasy Battle. The game box supplies the coaches with players enough to field human and orc teams, which are also the teams recommended to newcomers for ease of learning. Teams may also contain individuals who are not part of the group of players used on the pitch, e.g., cheerleaders. The different races progress at different rates, so not all teams start at equal strength. Some become more dominant only after they accrue some experience. Certain teams, such as the halflings in the ogres, are designed to provide more of a challenge for experienced players due to their built-in weaknesses. Background. The Blood Bowl universe has its own fictional background story which establishes the tone and spirit of the game. Additional background exists to describe the demeanor and character of the Blood Bowl players, with frequent reference to rule-breaking and excessive violence in a light-hearted manner. The over-the-top nature of the game is reflected through the game's mechanics, including the use of stylized secret weapons ranging from chainsaws to spiked steamrollers. The ability for large teammates to throw small teammates downfield, as well as in-game effects like fans throwing rocks and injuring players prior to kickoff. Blood Bowl includes numerous tongue-in-cheek references to real-life products and companies. The deity overseeing Blood Bowl is Nuffle, a pun on the pronunciation of NFL. The game spoofs at least 4 real-world trademarks, including McDonald's, Budweiser, Adidas, and Gatorade. Many team names in the game's background are spoofs as well, such as the Oakland Raiders and the Darkside Cowboys. Famous sporting personalities are parodied as well, with the most famous coach in Blood Bowl's background being Toma Landry the Undying, and one of the most recently added stars being the ogre thrower, Brickfarth. With the advent of the 3rd edition, Blood Bowl moved closer to the traditional Warhammer Fantasy Battle world by changing the miniatures to look more similar to their Warhammer Fantasy Battle counterparts. Jervis Johnson, designer of the game, has admitted this was not the best direction for the game, and has since stated that the Blood Bowl world is similar to, but definitely not the same as, the Warhammer world. Recent changes to the rules reflect this, and newer miniatures for the game look more sporty in nature. History. Blood Bowl has evolved through a series of rules revisions, boxed set releases, and electronic media. First edition released in 1986. The first edition of Blood Bowl was a simple game that used many of the elements of Games Workshop's existing tabletop games. Players in the first edition box set were represented by small pieces of cardboard illustrated with their likeness. Citadel Miniatures did release metal miniatures to represent players for first edition. The pitch of this edition consists of 6 interlocking cardboard sections with squares marked by white lines. Discussions with Jervis Johnson at the Chaos Cup tournament in 2006 revealed that he had never seen Monsters of the Midway until after Blood Bowl was published, and that the concept of a fantasy football board game was simply a concept whose time had come in the 1980s. Second edition. The second edition of Blood Bowl, released in 1988, began to move Blood Bowl away from the battlefield mechanics of other Games Workshop systems and toward more brutal sports-oriented play. The game included plastic 28mm miniatures of orcs and humans, with another set of metal miniatures available from Citadel Miniatures to represent most of the other races. The pitch of this edition consists of 3 thick, grey polystyrene boards, with squares marked by grooves. Games Workshop later provided a boxed supplement, Dungeon Bowl, dealing with subterranean play and dwarvish and elvish teams, and, later, 2 sourcebooks, Blood Bowl Star Players and the Blood Bowl Companion, which added to the basic rules, creating games with greater variation which could easily last several hours. Kerunch. In 1991, Games Workshop released Kerunch, a light version of Blood Bowl, developed by Andy Jones. It was released along with Mighty Warriors, Ultramarine and Space Fleet, and was predominantly aimed at the younger gamer as an introduction to the Games Workshop hobby. The rules are a simplified version of those from Blood Bowl's second edition. The game came with 24 plastic miniatures, and is considered a collector's item. Third edition. A new edition was released in 1994, radically changing the gameplay from the complex, lengthy second edition game to the simpler, more dramatic third edition game. Key changes were a set number of turns and the turnover rule. These changes increased the pace of the game and allowed it to be played within the span of around 2 hours. The third edition also featured a completely new range of miniatures, including new versions of plastic 28mm humans and orcs in the boxed set. The new range closely resembled Warhammer Fantasy Battle miniatures, combined with the newly available races mirroring Warhammer armies. Blood Bowl moved much closer to Warhammer Fantasy Battle. In 1995, the third edition Blood Bowl won the Best Miniatures Rules of 1994 Origins award. The pitch of this edition consists of a cardboard foldable board, with squares marked by black crosses at the corners. Fourth edition. Rule updates and living rulebook. Jervis Johnson produced a new official 4th edition of the Blood Bowl rules and presented it in the Fanatics Games official Blood Bowl magazine issue 1, with follow-up rules presented in issue 2. The new rules were a large departure from the previous edition with numerous changes, and Johnson later admitted that some of the changes would have benefited from rather more rigorous play testing. In 2001, the 4th edition rules, with corrections and retitled 4th edition Gold, were placed on the Games Workshop website as a downloadable PDF file, and Johnson announced that the rules were now experimental, and announced the creation of the Blood Bowl Rules Committee, a group of Blood Bowl players, some GW staff, most not, that would look at the rules once a year and produce new official rules changes and experimental rules for possible inclusion in the future rules changes. The BBRC would meet in October each year, and their first release was the Living Rulebook 1. The Living Rulebook, currently in its 6th edition, which is said by the BBRC to be the final version, is available from the official Blood Bowl site under the name of Blood Bowl Competition Rules Pack, or CRP. Originally there were plans to release a printed version for Blood Bowl's 20th anniversary, but this has since been cancelled. With the release of the CRP, the BBRC was disbanded. All LRB updates include clarified or rewritten rules, coverage of previously unclear special cases, and game balance adjustments to skills, team lists, star players, cost and availability of star players and other special characters, etc. LRB 1 changes core rules about referees spotting fouls and use of wizards, and league rules about player aging and the handicap system. LRB 2 contains small changes, with some focus on the rules for passing and intercepting the ball. LRB 3 contains small changes. LRB 4 rule changes enforce the minimum team size of 11 and make other minor improvements. Vampire and Ogre teams become official and the respective player skills are added. Handicaps are changed by removing half the possible random results because they had various issues. LRB 5 changes cases of turnover, handling of stunned players and many parts of league rules. The sections about tournaments and playoffs is expanded. Spiraling expenses are introduced as a way to handicap strong teams in the long term. Post-game procedures are completely rewritten. Random handicap rolls are replaced by inducements. Rules for post-game player improvements and results are modified. Players can put team money in a bank. In 2007, the BBRC approved Slan, Chaos Pact and Underworld teams, but they were not included in the subsequent official LRB CRP releases for lack of official miniatures. LRB 6 drafts, later re-edited as CRP, contained small rule changes but significant changes to teams, star players and skills. The majority of Blood Bowl is now played by the newest LRB 6 CRP rules. often also allowing the 2007 teams, given the reliance on easy-to-change tables and lists and the tradition of playing leagues among friends or under the absolute authority of some organizer. Customization of allowed teams and star players and of prize and tournament structures, as well as adoption of some house rules, should be expected. Copies of the 4th edition of the game, physically released in 2002, are almost identical to the 3rd edition. All pieces remain the same. Distinguishable elements include the 2002 copyright date and the editorial change from 2 rule books in 3rd edition, both with play scenes on the cover, to the same material in a single handbook. Leagues and tournaments. League play is the foundation upon which Blood Bowl games are based. There are many kinds of league activity, but they all tie into a general campaign where teams battle each other over a period of time, developing new abilities and suffering injuries or worse while attempting to earn the crown of league champion. Tournaments are one-off events where large numbers of Blood Bowl teams gather to play against each other and try to become the tournament champion. This form of play differs from a recreational league. Games Workshop holds 4 major tournaments across the world each year. The Blood Bowl was held at Warhammer World from 2003 until 2010 at Games Workshop's HQ in Nottingham, England in the spring and attracted around 200 players to play in the 2-day event. The Dungeon Bowl is held in Germany. The Spike Magazine Trophy is held in Surrey, British Columbia, Canada in early September, and the Chaos Cup is held in Chicago, Illinois, USA in late September. Numerous other events are held throughout the world at Games Workshop stores and events or independently. In January 2003, a website was opened for the purpose of helping people organize their own Blood Bowl tournaments, to promote Blood Bowl to the wargaming world, and to rank players' performance at tournaments. The organization took the name NAF, after the fictional rules body in the Blood Bowl history. In October 2007, the NAF held a World Cup tournament in Nottingham, England over 3 days, with teams coming from as far afield as the United States and Australia. 272 players attended, making it not only the largest Blood Bowl event ever held to that date, but the largest Games Workshop-related event in history. In the end, victory was awarded to a team from France, whilst a German coach won the individual coaching award. In 2010, GW announced they were going to stop running the Blood Bowl tournament, but allowed the NAF to take over the running of the event, renamed as the NAF Championship. Video games. Games Workshop first announced a series of video games based on their properties in 1990, to include a conversion of Blood Bowl by UK company Tynesoft. However, Tynesoft went into bankruptcy before the game was released. In 1995, an MS-DOS version of Blood Bowl was developed by Strategic Simulations, Inc., and released by Microleague, featuring the base teams as well as many of the free agents. In 2004, French-based Cyanide Studios developed a game called Chaos League which bore a heavy resemblance to Blood Bowl in its style and rules. Even though it was a real-time game, Games Workshop sued over the similarities, but later announced that Cyanide Studios had been granted a license to create computer games based on Blood Bowl, and that any differences between Games Workshop and Cyanide have been amicably settled for an undisclosed sum. And as part of the settlement, the Chaos League title has been assigned to Games Workshop. This settlement led directly to Cyanide's release of an official new version for Windows computers on the 26th of June 2009. With a subsequent patch, Dark Elves were added to the game as a playable race. On the 14th of November 2007, the Nintendo DS, PlayStation Portable, and Xbox 360 versions were announced. These were subsequently released, and followed very closely the tabletop rules at that time. On the 28th of October 2010, Cyanide Studios released the Legendary Edition of Blood Bowl for PC only, called Blood Bowl Legendary Edition. The game includes a reworked interface in the menu screens and a large number of new races added to the game, including Undead, Khemri, Norse, Elves, Halfling, Amazon, Ogre, Necromantic, Nurgle, Vampire, and High Elves. This brings the total races represented to 20. The Chaos Edition, released in October 2012, adds a further 3 races in the form of the Underworld, Chaos Dwarf, and Khorne teams, bringing the total to 23. Cyanide Studios released an adaptation of Dungeon Bowl in the same year. A sequel, Blood Bowl 2, was released for 2015 comic book. In May of 2008, Boom Studios published Blood Bowl Killer Contract, a 5-issue mini-series written by Matt Forbeck and drawn by Ladd Helloven. Storyline followed the Bad Bay Hackers in a grudge match against the Auckland Raiders. The mini-series was collected into a graphic novel that was released in November 2008 as both a softcover and a hardcover.